Welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast, where we chop it up about all things past, present, and future about the game of basketball. Where facts, stats, and context reign supreme.
That is blasphemous!
Sometimes it gets crazy, but we always keep it real. Get ready to learn from players, coaches, and fans from all levels of the game and see the court in a brand new way. And now, fresh off the sidelines, here's your host, John Hartofilis.
What it do, fellas, and welcome to the Big Fellas Podcast. I'm your host, JH, coming to you from the North Fork on Long Island, just outside the Mecca of basketball. Today, I'm joined by a few players from my freshman basketball team, coming in from Staten Island at point guard, number 5, Tim Gannon. From Midtown Manhattan at guard, number 4, Kwesi Wordy. From Stuytown, the big fella, man in the middle, number 30, Chris Gannon. And right beside me at both forward spots, number 21, Dimitrios Barus, and number 22, Thomas Fellenstein. We've got a good one in store for you today, fellas. Episode number 6, the 2012-2013 New York Knicks, the lone bright spot. What's going on, fellas? Okay, everyone, just to start off, what's the biggest lesson you learned throughout the season?
I gotta say, it's playing where your feet are. Like, coming into Xavier, I would always be, worrying about what I did the last play or what was going to happen later in the game. And you and all our other coaches taught me to focus on what was going on and the play that we're in right now. So I'd say that was the biggest lesson I learned.
Work ethic, just because me, working at the same thing over and over again, I got better at a lot of the things that I do in basketball.
I learned that it's not the ref's fault. It's not your shoe's fault. It's not your teammates' fault. It's your fault. You have to take accountability for your actions and what you do wrong. And the only way to fix your mistakes is by working hard, having good work ethic, like Kwesi said.
Yeah, so what I learned during the year is that your attitude is one of the biggest parts of your game. Like, if you miss a shot, you make a bad defensive possession, or you have a turnover, you have to pick your head up and, not leave your head down and worry about the next possession. Got to have a short-term memory. So, got to forget the last play and focus on the next one.
So I learned that it's important to make layups, and if you want to score, you should run the floor.
Well said, Chris. Great stuff, everyone. Next up, the Knicks finished 54-28, won their first Atlantic Division title since the 1994 season, and it was their highest win total since 1997. They posted the third best offensive rating in the entire NBA with a pace of 111 points per 100 possessions. However, they only scored 100 points a game, which was only good for 11th in the league because of how slow their pace was. And that's a byproduct of the fact that with such a mature squad and an ISO scorer being their superstar, that resulted in them playing with the 6th slowest pace at only 90 possessions a game. In the same breath, opponents only scored 95.7 points per game, which was good for 7th in the league, but they gave up 106 points per 100 possessions, which was 18th in the league. When we normalize possessions, the Knicks really aren't favored because they played at such a slow pace, but when they were able to play their style of basketball, they slow it down and make it more of a defensive-centered game, keep it low scoring. Onto some context, the previous year for the Knicks was a very interesting one that led us to the 2013 season, and there were a plethora of roster changes that took place that allowed the team to take shape.
Yeah, so the previous year, we had an average record of 36-30 in a lockout shortened year, securing the 7th seed. It was a turbulent season where Mike D'Antoni resigned and Woodson stepped in. It was also insanity, a 3-week, period of Jeremy Lin just absolutely dominating. And he played out of his mind, averaging 27-8. He then suffered a season-ending injury, and we were eliminated in 5 games to the Heat, who ended up winning the championship that year.
Really, the only roster change that was noticeable was Jeremy Lin to the Rockets. So they opted for experience that offseason and went on to acquire Jason Kidd and Pablo Prigioni, 2 of the most experienced ball handlers that they could possibly get, while also acquiring Felton in the trade. They added James White, Quentin Richardson, and Chris Copeland to add athleticism to shooting team.
They tried adding more depth at center when they traded Tony Douglas and James Harrelson, Jerome Jordan, and a 2014 and 2015 second-round pick to the Houston Rockets for Marcus Camby. This would be his last year in the league, though. Later in the year, they added Kenyon Martin and Rasheed Wallace and finally assembled a squad of recognized names, although they were past their primes.
Are there any really notable players you guys want to take a deep dive into?
Yeah, sure. I'll talk about Melo. He was the league's top scorer that year with 28.7 points per game, which was a career high for him. He even got one first-place MVP vote, which prevented LeBron from becoming the first unanimous NBA MVP. which Steph did 3 years later in 2016, Carmelo finished third overall in the MVP race this year. That year, he had the highest three-point percentage of his career at 38% and a 56 true shooting percentage. He scored 50 points once and 40 points 7 times. He also set a franchise record of 31 consecutive games with 20-plus points, along with tying the franchise record of 5 consecutive games played with 35-plus points, which was previously held by Bernard King. This year, Melo took a step forward in eliminating a jab step happy deep twos and focused more on shooting three-pointers, taking it to the basket, or posting up defenders. His offensive eruption this year surely had something to do with his move to the power forward position. He stretched the floor and knocked down jumpers on big men unwilling to come out to the perimeter. When they did, Anthony blew past them off the dribble. Then when teams tried to cross-match with him, he posted up most small forwards.
Awesome stuff, Tim. That was really insightful and a really in-depth analysis on Melo's play that season, how he evolved from the years before that into one of the top scorers in the game during that time. Anyone else have any players that just really stuck out to you from that team?
Yeah, I have one, J.R. Smith. So he played 35 games in 2011 and 2012, but he came back and had the best season of his career. And he averaged 18.1 points per game and 5.3 rebounds, which are both career highs. His play that season also earned him the Sixth Man of the Year award, which with that, he became the third player in franchise history to win the award, joining Anthony Mason and John Starks. Woodson chose to have either one of Carmelo or Smith at any point in the game, which is the only reason he wasn't a starter. He earned Eastern Conference Player of the Week honors for the period ending March 31st after posting 3 consecutive 30-point efforts off the bench, becoming the first NBA player to accomplish the feat in over 23 years. His percentages were not so impressive, 35% from 3 and 42% overall, but they don't tell the full picture as he was always taking tough shots in a scoring role off the bench.
Super interesting stuff, Kwesi. It's really awesome to think about just how even a great scorer just is better suited for the team to come off the bench and really provide the spark they need to go from one level to the next and just completely change the pace and flow of the game.
All right. Tyson Chandler was named to his only NBA All-Star appearance, tied a franchise record with 3 straight 20-rebound games, first since Willis Reed in 1969. On February 27th, he had 16 points and a career-best 28 rebounds in a 109-105 win over the Golden State Warriors. First Knick to make all-defensive team since Charles Oakley in 1994. Overall, this team was better than the 2012 team, but Chandler couldn't make them as good defensively as they dropped from 5th to 17th in defensive efficiency. He also had a major drop after the All-Star game for an unknown reason. Before the All-Star game, he was averaging 11.4 points, 67.3% from the field, and 11.1 rebounds. And after the All-Star game, he was averaging 7.6 points, only 50% from the field, and 9.1 rebounds, a significant drop.
Definitely, Chris. For a big man, that's definitely a huge drop-off and something that will really make it difficult for your team to win if your big man's only making half of his layups. Moving on to the playoffs, we're going to break down both the first and second round against the Celtics and Pacers, respectively.
So in the first round, the Knicks played the Celtics, and the Knicks got up to a 3-0 lead. So, we obviously thought we were in good shape. The Celtics then came back, winning games 4 and 5, put it to 3-2. The game 4 was a loss in overtime, and the game 5 was also a close game. We lost by 6. Game 6 came up. The Knicks made it hard on themselves. We were up as much as 26 points in the fourth quarter, and then we almost lost but held them off and won 88-80.
The Knicks exercised their postseason demons and advanced to the second round of the playoffs for the first time in 13 years since 2000. For the Celtics, this was the last series of their Big Three and launched their rebuild. All games were extremely close and low scoring. The Knicks did not score above 90 in any of the 6 games, but their defense prevailed. Carmelo averaged 29.2, and Felton was huge the whole series with 17.2.
The second round series against the Pacers was a much more back and forth one than in the first round against the Celtics. Eventually, the Pacers pulled away, winning the series 4-2. However, Carmelo dominated Paul George for the series, averaging 28.5 points per game on a much better percentage than PG. But he just didn't have enough help around him to beat a much more balanced Pacers team. Hibbert outplaying Chandler and Stevenson outplaying Smith were major reasons for this disappointment. For the series, Stevenson averaged 11.7 points per game and 8.2 rebounds per game, both much higher
regular season marks of 8.8 points and 3.9 rebounds, respectively.
Yeah, so also my input is that J.R. Smith was a putrid 28.9% from the field. He shot 26 for 90 and just 9 for 39 from 3, which is 23.1%. He averaged 13.5 points per game in a series, well off his regular season average of 18.1. When an ailing Carmelo Anthony needed someone to pick up some of the scoring slack against the Pacers, Smith just couldn't get it done with any consistency. And the other key factor, Hibbert, averaged 13 and 10, with Chandler only averaging 6 and 6. Carmelo had 39 in this Game 6 loss.
On to some more fun topics. This Knicks team, the 2013 Knicks, joined the Knicks 50 Wins Club, and they were the only team to do that in the 2000s, and the first one to do that in the last 20 years. Last winning exactly 50 games in the year 2000. They've struggled mightily since then to even come close to pushing that number, crossing 40 wins only 2 times in that span, and only one other time since 2001. So in 18, 19 years, they only won over 40 games one time, 2 years before in 2011. On to some what ifs. What do you guys think happens if Amare Stoudemire wasn't injured for that entire season?
People forget how good Amare Stoudemire was. That guy was a beast.
If you guys want to put it into perspective, the Knicks took the Pacers to 6 games, and the Pacers took the Heat to 7. So how much does Amare swing that to where the Knicks can maybe get over the Pacers and give the Heat a run for their money? But if Amare Stoudemire is the player we remember him being, maybe not in Phoenix, but in those early Knicks years, his first and second year there, they're a completely different team. They you have to consider them that way.
Especially because he was such a big piece of the puzzle for us. So, like, you replace a guy like, Amare Stoudemire at the state he was playing in with, a 6th or 7th man. It's a really big drop off in performance.
Next up, what do you guys think happens if Chandler played even close to the way he did in Dallas when they won the championship in 2011?
I think that he wins his second defensive player of the year, and the Knicks are probably pushing a 60-win team.
Chris, how do you think that changes things for them in the playoffs then if Tyson Chandler's playing the way he was and is able to go to battle with Roy Hibbert instead of getting outplayed?
Well, I think we're still the 2 seed, but I think we definitely at least take them to 7, if not win the whole series. And
then after that, who knows what happens with the Heat and the Spurs. Interesting, good stuff. Moving on to what we wish we could bring back. I just really want to see energy in the Garden. I could just imagine that playoff atmosphere just being absolutely electric. I've been to Toronto for the Eastern Conference Finals. I went last year, and that was an amazing experience. But I can only imagine if that situation was happening in Madison Square Garden, the mecca of basketball.
Especially considering I've been to a lot of Knicks games in the past 3 years. And even, with a 20-win team, the atmosphere is still so electric. So having playoff basketball in New York would be insane.
Yeah, well, not only playoff basketball, but I was at the game where Melo dropped 62, and that was one of my favorite days of my life.
On to what we wish we could forget. I just really want to get rid of the mental image of Roy Hibbert blocking Carmelo's dunk attempt in Game 6 and just basically erasing the entire Knicks season. What do you guys think about that?
That's the point where, as a Knicks fan, I realized our chances at winning a chip were over.
For how long, Tim?
It was pretty sad for me.
In terms of what I call the defining game of the entire season, it has to be one that just kind of signaled the future of what was to come. When the Knicks tied the franchise record of 20 made threes on April 9th against the Wizards, it kind of really just showed how this is kind of the trajectory the league's going in, and they were a historic team at the time, and it's kind of interesting to see how all those records they set have been crushed in the modern day.
Okay. What I thought was interesting was even after the Knicks beat OKC on April 7th, Mike Woodson improved to 68 and 32 as the Knicks head coach, which was the best 100-game mark in franchise history, even compared to the great Red Holzman.
Yeah, it just didn't prevent him from getting fired a year later on April 21st, 2014, just because of all the struggles that the Knicks went through.
Our last question, did the 2013 Knicks play in the right era? Were they too early, too late, or just right? I think they were just right because they were shooting threes at such a high volume at a time where that wasn't really normal, but it was about to become normal. And I think that's kind of made them take their subpar defense and a supercharged offense that worked even with a slower pace.
I would agree with that because, some people might argue that we were too early since we shot so many threes, but I don't think it was early enough to say that we were too early. I'd say it was, just in the right amount before, shooting threes became such a prominent tactic in the NBA. And I'd say they were just right because even though that strategy of shooting so many threes was basically our whole offense, it really came down to a bunch of better plays by the other team instead of faults by us.
I also agree that they were just right, because even though many people would say they're ahead of their time, I think that's exactly what you need to be a great team in the NBA. Most of the teams that were considered transcendent also are the teams that tend to be most successful. So I think they were just right to be successful.
That was an absolutely great point, Tim. It's obviously to be the first to do something is kind of what sets teams apart from one another and kind of what makes a team remembered in their era. So great point.
All right, so I just believe that the Knicks were just a bit too early. Although it's just a 7-year difference, I feel like if they were placed like in this time right now, I feel like they could have been way more successful. They could have done better or gotten farther at least.
As we all know, fellas, all good choppers must come to an end. That's all for today's episode. Special thanks to Tim, Kwesi, Tom, Dimitri, and Chris for coming on today. I know I loved every second of it, and I hope you fellas enjoyed it too. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Big Fellas Podcast. Check us out on all major social media platforms at Big Fellas Pod to join the chop up. You can also listen to us on every podcast platform on the planet. Stay tuned for the next episode, Big Fellas.